Okay, we are live.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Brett McIntyre, and I'll be chairing the hearing this morning. Zooming in is our panel member, Diane Knight, and sitting next to me to my right is Doug Marks. Our assessor for today is Jamie Fougere, and our hearing secretary is Stephen Lund. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note that you're placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Border Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 8 on our docket today. Mr. Lund, please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony. Thank you very much.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jamie Fougere.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Mr. Newman, if you please stand. Please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You can be seated.
Thank you very much. First item on the docket today is 55 Waterford Green, and I'll ask both parties, is there any preliminary issues on this property?
No.
Jamie, you may proceed.
All right. So the first property we have here is 55 Waterford Green Common.
Jamie, can you speak a little closer to the mic?
Sure. I had this issue last time.
Can you turn the volume up on your?
That's what I have been looking for.
So where the mute button is, there's a little arrow.
Okay.
That works.
And then it says audio settings when you hit the arrow.
Somebody who knows. I certainly don't.
Yes. Is it the input that?
So now you want to go volume of your speaker and volume of your microphone. And turn the volume of the microphone up.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Way better.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. I very
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Dan.
Somebody showed me, so I'm just passing it along.
Pay it forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the first property on the docket here is 55 Waterford Green Common. The roll number is 14100123235. And we do have a recommendation for this property. Have a recommendation to lower the value from the original assessment, which was $12,459,000. And I would propose to reduce the value to $11,512,000. And the basis and the rationale for this is that approximately 12,979 square feet is actually unfinished. So this is a newer property set up in the northeast end of the city. You can see on my page 2, just to get a bit of a bird's eye view, and then we have some pictures, some Google Street View pictures on page 2 as well as 3. And actually on the bottom of page 3, this is from a listing that I've taken here just to give credit. So as I say, there is 12,979 square feet that is unfinished. Had a chance to drive by it yesterday to confirm which units were unfinished. So from what I saw from the inspection, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units, possibly 8, depending, because a couple of the units I believe are combined. But at any rate, what I've done to make an allowance for the unfinished space was to use $150 a square foot on that unfinished space as a deduction overall to the value. As well with my recommendation, which I apologize I didn't have a chance to provide everybody with a copy just because of the time frame. But I'm proposing using actuals, since it's pretty much a brand new building here, using actuals. And then on the unfinished spaces using $22, which we'll see is on the low end of what they've been able to achieve there. And then I've used a 12% vacancy allowance to account for that percentage of space that is unoccupied at this time and unfinished. But again, I'm providing both the vacancy allowance and the $150 a square foot unfinished allowance. And so that's coming out to $11,512,000. And I've sort of tentatively been reaching out to Mark. Unfortunately, haven't had a chance with my schedule to have more fulsome discussions. So I don't actually know if the recommendation would be acceptable to him. But maybe before I go on, we can just.
Maybe I'll just ask him.
So as the assessor indicated, we have been trying, and regrettably, we've not been able to connect for me to understand what the assessor is proposing. And what I've heard this morning is that there'd be a deduction of $150 a square foot for 12,979 square feet. By my math, that comes to $1,946,850. But I think he's moved the vacancy to 12%, but I think what he's doing is he's completely revising the assessment, I'm gathering. So unfortunately, I'm not in a position to accept that. I do appreciate the recognition of the unfinished space, and indeed, It's a major theme of my calculation of value. So I think we're going to have to proceed.
Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, Jamie.
Okay, so just gonna bring it up here. So continuing on with my presentation here, we can see on page 4, I have a list of the subject property leases. They range from $29 a square foot on the high end down to $25. I did make reference to a $22 rental rate. I believe that is actually more than likely post-reference, so I apologize for that. That square footage, just for context, is I believe the largest unit in the property. And then you can see on my page 5, I have a list of newer properties within different areas in the city, but you can see that there is a range from, we'll say, around $25. I'm seeing 24 at 1255 St. James, up to $35 here. But most of what we would expect would be sort of close to the $30 range. Again, you have new areas here: Sage Creek, Northtown Road, Taylor, 1150 Taylor, 2579 Main Street, which we'll see later in the docket, and then St. Mary's Road, Plessis. So it's, and then here on Marion as well. It's pretty consistent that you would see values sort of on the higher side. I'm going to maybe forego my page 6. As Mr. Newman pointed out, I did revise what we've done here, because if you did want to take a look at the page 6, this is the original assessment. The rental ranges here are really, for the unfinished spaces, are really not reflective of what would be generated had it been finished. And that's the purpose of the unfinished allowance, is to recognize the space is not complete. But if you're going to deduct something in the neighborhood of $150 a square foot from the valuation, you really ought not to be using rental rates that aren't reflective of what a furnished or fitted up space would be. So I've tried to, again, with $22 a square foot on the unfinished space, tried to recognize that, I tried to be conservative with the number that I came in with. And then I applied both the vacancy, which would account for that space, as well as the unfinished allowance, which would recognize then the physical condition of the space. So the vacancy is a market, a measure of the market interest in the property. And I'm saying, this has come online, I believe, towards the end of 2018. And I'm saying, with the vacancy adjustment, I'm recognizing that these spaces have not been snatched up immediately, probably largely due to the past 2 years. But then I'm also recognizing the physical condition by way of the unfinished allowance. And I would suggest to you that if we were to simply take what was already here in our assessment. At face value, you know, the $15, $18 range for the unfinished space, you would really be overcompensating on giving them a break for that space. The $18 and $17, it really isn't. You should either come up with a storage rate on shelf space potentially, or give an unfinished allowance. And I'm opting to do what we typically do here, which is the unfinished allowance on that space. Yeah, that's my presentation. And again, sorry, just to summarize, I apologize, a little scattered here. For the other units, the units that are rented, I've proposed using the actual rents that they have in place. And again, that value in total would come out to $11,512,000. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
I just have one question before we open up questioning.
Yep.
Have you revised the workup for the rent?
Yes, I have.
Can you give us those figures?
Sure, just going to be one moment here. So for the first space, let me see if it's following the same order. I apologize for not having this for you in advance. Another thing that I should say that I've done here is I've used the areas described in the income and expense questionnaire. So maybe that's one way to do this. If you scroll to the bottom of my brief, starting on page 15, we have, so on page 15 of my brief, we have the income and expense questionnaire. And
well, you have the master rent roll there. Page
yes, 10. Yes. And so this will give you a sense of where I've gotten the rental rates from. So this is the 2020 mailer. Even though I know it says in the top corner here, April 2021, this is what we received for 2020. And so I had made reference to a $22 rate on the unfinished space that was based off of the lowest rental rate achieved at the mall. And you can see that's actually A1 here. Unit A1, the first unit here that's listed. So again, these are the rental rates that I've plugged into my workup. So $22 for 7,563 square feet, $25 for 1,190 square feet. And so the reason why I want to refer to the master rent roll here is because in our brief, we actually had areas that were taken before the areas were finalized and through the leases. And so, you know, some units were slightly larger, some units were slightly smaller with what we had. So I've corrected them to match the master rent roll here. And again, I'm proposing using the actual rents across the board, except for the unfinished space, which I'm proposing using $22. And again, overall using a vacancy rate of 12% and applying the unfinished allowance of $150 per square foot on the unfinished space. So if I may kind of leave that with you in terms of the actuals that we're using for the other units.
Okay, Just to make it clear, Jamie, if you go to page 8 of your submission, the potential rent is no longer 886,185.
Correct.
So what is it?
So the potential rent total there is $1,067,769.
One.
Yeah.
679.
Yeah, 1,067,000.
So 67,000. Okay.
769.
And the vacancy is now 12%?
Correct.
And you're still talking 42,760 square feet?
So it's actually, with the corrected areas, it's 44,179 square feet.
Okay. So the new NOI is?
And the resulting NOI that I have here is 863,734.
And the cap rate?
And the cap rate I have not changed to 6.4.
And the shortfall then?
And the shortfall I've left at $9 a square foot. And then I've used 3% for the non-recoverables for the expense percentage.
So the NOI is 863,734 with a cap rate of 6.4%, would get you 13,495,000.
Right. And then we've also applied the unfinished allowance here.
And that's the 150 per square foot.
Right.
How many square
At
feet?
12,979 a square foot, so 1,946,850 comes off of that.
Right. So, and we actually have two different ways, or I guess there's multiple ways, but the other way that I was looking at dealing with the unfinished allowance was using 50% of the unfinished space. And that's what was done previously. So if you just did the math, and I trust that you did, as you were saying, you may notice that the value is slightly different. I just used the lower of the two because, again, we have at this property previously used the other method. I am familiar with the $150 a square foot. It's a little bit easier to explain. But that's what I've done there. So alternatively, the way that the math works out, you probably got 11,549,000 or so.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So is that what your recommendation is, not the 512, the 11,512?
Both they're in a fairly tight range. Both I believe would be acceptable. I erred on the side of trying to have some resolution here, so I chose the smaller value of the two, the lower value.
And that's 11,512,000.
Right. That's right.
Okay, Mark, do you have any questions?
So let me just clarify something, because I do have a non-recoverable, but we'll deal with that separately. Okay. So let me start by saying I have a high degree of respect for Mr. Foucher. And I mean that sincerely. And regrettably, he and I have not been able to speak. And so although he sent me an email at approximately 9 p.m. last night with some numbers, I had no idea what he was doing on this property until I heard it this morning. My first reaction is fundamentally what he's doing is seeking an increase to the value, then making a deduction for unfinished areas. But he's fundamentally changing the assessment. Of course, I prepared on the basis of the assessment that was in place, and that's now changed. So I'll have some things to say about that, but let me ask a series of questions. Mr. Fougere, you spoke about the $22 rate that's in place for Anytime Fitness, correct?
Correct.
And at one point, you said that that was unfinished space still. And there,
No, I apologize.
okay.
I meant to say I've used the lowest rental rate that they've achieved in the mall
Right.
or the spaces that are unfinished. And then after the fact, I've adjusted those spaces, the value contributed by those spaces through the unfinished allowance, whether you get through the first method that I had mentioned or the other method, it results in pretty much the same value, difference of, 35,000 or 37,000 or something like that.
All right. So you also made the comment that the space came online approximately the end of 2018. And you made the observation that the space has not been snatched up readily due to the last 2 years. And just so we're clear, that's a recognition that this is retail space and it's been difficult for retailers through COVID. Is that a fair summary?
I think that it's been a bit of a minefield. I think it's been difficult for some retailers. I think that the value of property has generally maintained. I don't think, I think it would be too soon to think to try to judge whether or not this has lasting impacts on the retail sector. But from everything that I've read and come across, there's confidence that, we were at a conference yesterday and...
Stop. I don't want to hear about a conference yesterday. That's post-reference.
I think the answer is yes or no.
Well, you really can't. You can say yes or no, but I think you're losing a lot of the picture if you say yes or no, with all due respect.
All right, fair enough. Let's leave it there.
Well, I think I'm entitled to finish my statement. If you don't like what I'm saying, then I apologize. But from what I've seen from market reports and market information, is that the value of commercial property has not, plummeted, and that there is reason for some optimism, and some sectors of the retail economy have done well during the pandemic, and certainly others haven't. And it's been difficult for everybody, and that's the only point that I'm trying to make.
Can we go to page 19 of your brief? This is the COVID questionnaire that was supplied by the property, correct?
Right.
And so at item 2, were any tenants closed temporarily? The answer was yes. Have any tenants closed permanently? The answer was no. Were there, item 4, were there increased expenses successfully passed on to tenants? The answer was no. Box 6, rent deferrals or rent abatements. So Anytime Fitness, and that's the tenant in the $22 space we've been speaking about, they were given rent forgiveness of $160,000, correct?
Right.
And there's a list of 4 other tenants below that Lucida's, who got 5 months base rent deferral, Hieroglyphics, 6 months rent deferral, Waterford Pharmacy, 3 months rent deferral, My Indigo, 3 months base rent deferral. So my question to you simply is that at April 1, 2021, would you agree that this property was experiencing difficulty with its tenants?
Right. I would agree.
Thank you. Next question. In addition to the difficulty with the tenants in place, this property had been unable to lease up a significant percentage of the space in the property, correct?
Correct.
And so an investor coming to purchase this property at April 1 of 2021 would be faced with significant rent deferrals for many of the tenants, as well as a significant vacancy, correct?
Correct.
Now, you've explained to us this morning that effectively the calculation that was in the original assessment, which is found on page 6 of your brief, are you suggesting that some of those rates, well, let's go back a step. The calculation on page 6 is a model generated calculation, correct?
Correct.
And are you suggesting that the model was treating some of the space as unfinished?
In a certain respect, whoever had set the characteristics for this property changed some of the quality measures on some of the units, and I since they correspond with the units that were unfinished, I would imagine that the logic was to account for the unfinished nature of the units, but it's not specifically a feature that says this is unfinished space, plug it into the model and have the model generate an unfinished rental rate, because unfinished, nobody rents unfinished space, obviously, aside from, you know, nobody really rents unfinished retail space, I'll say that. So really, they're just trying to be factored backwards.
So I'm sorry, finish.
So I think that using what I've tried to do is use a market rental rate and then back it out through an adjustment on a per square foot basis instead of trying to come up with some sort of reduced value on the units themselves through the model.
So the way the model works, and the questions I'm about to ask will be applicable to later properties we'll do. The assessor has the ability to control the rent quality of a property, correct?
Yes, to a degree, yeah.
And by whichever setting is used for the rent quality, that in turn has an impact on the rents that are generated by the model for each of the areas of the property.
That's a question?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And so whoever did this, when they set the rent quality for this property, they weren't setting it as unfinished space, I'm suggesting to you. They were simply setting it as a lesser quality rent. And that in turn affected the rates that the model assigned. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've explained to us that your new calculation uses a net operating income of $863,734 and applies a 6.4% capitalization rate. right?
Correct.
And that gets us to 13,495,000, and you then take off $150 a square foot to get us to either 11,549,000 or 11,512,000, depending on which method.
Yes, I think as you've just summarized there, though, I think it's important to point out that I've given 12% vacancy allowance with respect to the unfinished spaces not being leased up.
But the
Component of
the vacancy at April 1 of 21, have you actually calculated it?
I have.
Wasn't it approximately 36%?
That is correct.
Right.
So just a little explanation of how you get 12% from 36. We have an internal guideline that basically prorates vacancy for an allowance purpose because you don't give a property that's fully leased 0% vacancy, and you don't give a property that's 100% vacant 100% vacancy because that result would be mathematically nonsensical. 100% vacancy would mean that for the allowance would mean that you have a negative value on a property. Well, that doesn't, that's not appraisal, sound appraisal theory. So we've prorated it. We don't typically go beyond 25%. And I think that, you know, that's sort of been precedent set. And so prorated, our internal document is suggesting 12%, and that's what I'm proposing using here.
Okay. And the capitalization rate of 6.4% that you're using, that's the same capitalization rate that one finds in the model workup on page 6 and page 8 of the brief, correct?
Correct.
So that's what the model says a property of this type should get by way of a capitalization rate.
Correct.
And the model took this property to be a property with 5% vacancy. And 5% vacancy is the standard market vacancy for a retail property, a neighborhood shopping center, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so even though this property has the issues it has in terms of a 36% vacancy, and I appreciate you've allowed it at 12, you've explained that, but it's actually got 36%. It's got unfinished space. It's got 5 or 6 tenants who aren't paying rent. You felt a 6.4% capitalization rate is what an investor would be prepared to buy it on at April 1 of 2021.
Yes, and I believe that that is true.
Yes, I'm sure you do. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Diane, do you have any questions?
I do not, no.
And
My question been answered, thank you.
just to repeat for the, you did not file for an increase on this property, correct?
That is correct. And, you know, we're looking at overall values here, and we're looking at what ultimately our endeavor here is to find what the property would have sold for at the reference date. And we're not tied to any particular measure of, you know, if the units are not the right size, I can increase them at the board. The value overall is not an increase. This is not an increase. there are many moving parts and components to an assessment, and to adjust only those that favor a lower assessment and be blind to other realities at the property, I think would not get you to what it reasonably would have sold for at the reference date. I think you would wind up with another conclusion. That would be something other than that. And, you know, overall, this is a reduction in value. So I would not be required to seek an increase.
Okay, that was my only question. Mark, you want to start with your presentation?
I do, thank you.
And then we'll do the non-recoverable.
Yes, thank you.
And just let me get there.
Yeah.
Okay, you can proceed.
So my presentation was, of course, based on how the assessment was originally prepared. I'm going to work with that to some extent still, and then I'm going to try and deal with the revisions that have been made. So on page 2, PDF page 2, we know this is an 8-building site. We've seen pictures. There's a site plan attached to my materials, and I'm going to try and not jump you around too much in the PDF. So even though I've made reference to the site plan, I'll come back to that in the sequence of the pages. So I'm not jumping you around.
Okay, that's fine.
So the cap rate is 6.4%. We were accepting of the gross potential income. We can have a wonderful debate about whether all that vacant space is still going to rent at $22 a square foot, which Mr. Fougere has used for it in the context of the hard times this property is clearly having. And we'll get to that as well. So we were raising issues of vacancy, the non-recoverable expenses, and the cap rate. As we've discussed, the actual vacancy at April 1 of 21 is 36.9%. At page 3 of my brief, I've got the heading vacancy, and I told you I was setting it at 12%, but in part I was setting it at 12%, which is about a third of the actual, on the basis that there would also be an adjustment to the capitalization rate. Non-recoverables, I'll come back to the actual submission, but I'll point out to you simply that there are 8 buildings on this site. Each of them is going to need a roof. There's a significant parking lot. There's legal audit and other related costs. The rent roll reveals commissions payable by tenants approximating $195,000 that are listed in subparagraphs A through J on page 3. And we know that there's considerable space that is not leased, that if God willing, they are able to lease it, they will pay a commission in order to lease it. And the point I'm making is that, and we'll come back to the concept of whether the assessor is prepared to recognize commissions as an expense. I'll deal with that. A non-recoverable expense, I'll deal with that when I get to the non-recoverable submission itself. But I wanted to show you these numbers and have you understand that on a go-forward basis at April 1 of 21, any buyer is going to be faced with the risk of having to lease it up, but also the cost. Then at page 4 of my brief, I talk about COVID. I'm going to do this once. I won't repeat this in any of the other properties, but I just want us not to forget where we've been in the context of COVID, because in some ways, maybe we are starting to forget. So at page 4, I have a bit of a chronology. Starts March 20th of 2020 with the state of emergency. Various public health orders follow. Restaurants to 50%, gyms are closed. Well, that's the biggest tenant on the site, Active Fitness. It was closed for a lengthy period of time. We see surges in COVID. We see retail limited to 25% of usual capacity. We see 2-meter separation. Do any of us remember when retailers could only sell essential items and they had to take tape, yellow tape, and put it around certain of the shelves because the items on those shelves were not essential items. So we go through this process. We've had a terrible time in our society with vaccine mandate conflicts. Let's not lose sight of that. COVID has had a significant impact on the payment of rent. I'm at the top now of page 6, and there's Collier's reporting that 16% of Canadian tenants paid no rent in May of 2020. 39% of tenants asked for rent relief, and we see that happening with the tenants in this property, where there's a list of 6 of them who could not pay their rent. COVID has been tough on small business. Let's not lose sight of that for one moment. And the reality is that the tenants who occupy, generally speaking, these neighborhood shopping centers are small local tenants. And this has been tough on them. And a lot of them have survived. And I'm on page 6 of my submission only because of government subsidy programs. And part of the impact of those government subsidy programs is the landlords had to give up 25% of the rent. Let's not forget, they had to give up 25% of the rent. So then we get to capitalization rates. And, you know, there's a concept recognized out there of what are called anchored strip plazas or neighborhood shopping centers. In my view, this is not an anchor. It doesn't have a large grocery store, national grocery chain anchoring it. Similarly, it doesn't have a national drugstore anchoring it. So what are capitalization rates? And again, I think it's important not to lose sight of this. And I'm at the bottom of page 7. What are capitalization rates? They represent the required or acceptable rate of return on a real estate investment. And it's influenced by 3 items, I'll suggest. The risk associated with the investment's income capacity, investor expectations for appreciation, and required returns in other investment vehicles. So what were investor expectations in April of 2021? What was the retail economic climate? And what would an investor expectation have been in respect to this property? And my simple answer to you is retail was changing. There was already a pronounced movement towards online servicing before we got to COVID. COVID simply accelerated that further. We see many large developers taking shopping centers and repositioning them into mixed-use properties. The old stadium site on St. James, it was a target for a while. It was supposed to be other things, a center of retail, and Cadillac Fairview applied to have it rezoned to allow multifamily. They don't think retail will work there anymore. We are over-retailed. We see online shopping. I'm at page 9 now. Here are all sorts of national chains and some local ones which have closed because the retail world has changed. And then we get to capitalization rates. And what I'm going to say is that universally, what I see is the capitalization rates for retail have come down compared to 2020. And I'm not certain why. And yes, everything will be property specific, but I'm not certain why that's happening because I think the economic climate and the risk factors for investors were much more difficult at April of 21 than they were at April of 2018. And so why have capitalization rates come down? And again, I'm not certain of what the answer to that is. So if we look on my page 10, there's the assessor's capitalization rate chart, both at April 1 of 2018, the upper one, and then the lower one is April 1 of 2021. And what we see is that for neighborhood shopping centers, the 20th percentile was 7.17, and the 80th percentile was 7.3%. And what we see that was for 2018, and what we see for 2021 is that the 20th percentile has dropped by 80 basis points from 7.15 down to 6.35. And The 80th percentile has dropped by 35 basis points from 7.3 to 6.95. This property is set at 6.4. And so that is barely above the 20th percentile. And that suggests to me that this property is among the cream of the crop for retail in this city. And yet, as we know, 36% vacancy with many tenants not paying rent. So on to page 11. Many of the real estate firms are doing surveys. If we go on to page 12, Altus did a survey in November of 2020. And the expectations of the investment community that were surveyed were to the effect that the anticipation was that cap rates were going to decrease. And 50% of the survey group thought they would decrease. Increase by 25 to 50 basis points. For top quality retail, that's the top chart, and then lower quality retail, 75% expect cap rates to increase for lower quality retail. And that's, again, that comes back to the concept of investor expectations, and investor expectations are important in the context of the capitalization rate. On page 13, an article from the Winnipeg Free Press, December of 2020, pandemic shutdowns are the last straw for some Canadian retailers, push others to the brink. And again, the difficulties that the retail world is experiencing generally. So then I move to page 14, quality and strength of covenant. And again, when you've got a national covenant, that's one thing. When you've got a lot of small retailers, that's completely different in terms of the risk profile. We see on this property, 6 of the tenants were not paying rent and needed deferrals to survive. That tells you something. So then, of course, when you compare buildings and put them in their appropriate rank in the capitalization rate world, you have to look at a variety of attributes. I'm on page 15 now. Quality of the tenancy, national versus small local, nature of the tenancy, drug store, grocery, national anchored as opposed to small local, neighborhood demographics, those kinds of things. And so I take all of that, and what I ended up doing, and now I'm on page 16, is I noted that the property was 36% vacant. I conservatively, in my view, used a 12% vacancy. But I said the capitalization rate has got to come up for a number of reasons. It's got to come up because this property, and more generally retail properties, I don't really see the basis for the capitalization rates to come down the way they have, and to bring this property at a 6.4 cap to 5 basis points above the 20th percentile doesn't seem appropriate. I used a 7% cap. I did that using the rents that were in place in the as generated by the assessor, and I was coming to a value of $9,679,000. And the very last page of my brief is that calculation. So let me then finish turning the pages. Page 17 is the overhead photo. Page 18 is a site plan of the property. Page 19 was the assessment as originally prepared by the assessor. The assessor's original $886,185 of gross potential income used an average rate of $20.72 per square foot. Then the income and expense questionnaire followed through page 24, 25, 26, 27. That's the rent roll. My page 28 and 29 are the COVID questionnaire, which I already asked the assessor about, which was in his brief as well. And then my page 30 was a calculation using a 7% cap, 12% vacancy, 7% non-recoverable, which I'll speak to some more, and brought to us to a value of $9,679,000. Let me just make a couple of comments about the recalculation that's been prepared by the assessor. I don't like it, as you've heard. I don't like hearing about the detail for the first time this morning, but leave that aside. So what the assessor's done is he's effectively brought the rents up on average to his gross potential income is $1,067,000, which calculates $24.16 a square foot. That's the average rent. And that's up from the original assessed rent of, as I said to you a few moments ago, $20.72 a square foot. So by a couple of $2-3. The net operating income becomes $863,734. I've heard about the protocols for vacancy in the past. I guess my attitude in some ways is what I'm going to urge upon you is use my original calculation, because that's how the assessment was done. But if you're going to take into account the assessor's revisions, so I think the capitalization rate has to change. And so one suggestion I could make to you is take the 863,734 NOI, use a 7 capitalization rate as I did to recognize the risk. Remember that there's only a 3% non-recoverable in that 863, and I'll get to why it should be higher as part of that submission. So if you cap the 863,734 at 7, that becomes $12,339,000. And if you then take off the assessor's $1,946,000 at $150 a square foot for the unfinished space, we get to $10,392,000 as opposed to $11,512,000. So again, my position with you will be that we should stick with the original calculation as I prepared it in the original assessment. But if you're going to consider the changes the assessor wants to make, then I think 2 things need to happen. One, the non-recoverable needs to increase, and we'll get to that and some more in that section. And secondly, we're going to use the assessor's NOI, adjusted or not, for the higher non-recoverables, apply a 7 cap, not a 6.4, considering the risk profile of this property at April 1 of 21. 6 tenants not paying rent, 36% of the space vacant. It doesn't matter that the assessor is only allowing 12%. For the investor, it's a 36% vacancy. That's my submission.
Thank you very much. Jamie, any questions?
Yes, please. So the last thing it said there, for an investor, it's 36% vacant. So that would be at the reference year, but an investor would look at, longer time horizons than a year or 2 or 3. They would more than likely, if they were to purchase a property like this, be looking at maybe a 10-year time horizon or something of that nature. Would you agree?
I would agree they'll be looking at a longer horizon.
Okay. With regards to the non-recoverables, are you aware that the way that our cap rates have been analyzed and the way that we arrived at the cap rate would be through consistent methodology, meaning if we are giving the sales that we're analyzing, if we're including things like leasing commissions, we would then arrive at a different cap rate than we have achieved here. And are you aware that we are being consistent with our sales analysis, and how we approach things like leasing commissions, to arrive at capitalization rates and using workups and allowances for non-recoverables that are consistent in both methodologies. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware.
Okay. I think those are my questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Diane, any questions?
Yeah, back to your page 10 of your presentation. So are you agreeing with the city's new cap rate for 2021 in the fact that a strip mall at the 20th percentile is 6.35, the 80th percentile is 6.95, what Collier, CBRE, and Cushman suggest?
I'm not agreeing. So first of all, with Collier's, there's always the methodology issue because they include closing costs.
Right.
And so their numbers are always a little bit low.
Mhm.
But if you look at CBRE, for example, on neighborhood shopping centers, they're reporting 6.5 to 7. And that's a generality, of course. You always still have to look at the individual property and see where it fits into the spectrum of things. And the more general position I'm taking is that capitalization rates, which by the city's methodology seem to have universally decreased. I don't think that's consistent with the marketplace as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Doug?
No questions for me at this time. Thank you.
And I don't have any questions of Mark. Jamie, this will be a redirect. And I've got just a general question. What was the purpose of a COVID survey sent out to, I assume, all the commercial property owners?
I can't speak for the intentions of management and those who have made that decision. I can speculate that similarly to how we approach or why we have income and expense questionnaires. We're trying to gauge what the market is doing, and insofar as what the experiences with COVID have been and how that has affected that income year, that particular income year that relates to, and I know COVID has obviously gone on for multiple years here. But to try to sort of, I think, take stock of the experiences on the ground with COVID, and this is how the department has chosen to go forward, reviewing, information that we have at our fingertips, and trying to make decisions with the full spectrum of the retail market in mind, I believe.
Was there ever any analysis of the COVID surveys?
I don't know that there was any specific analysis or not, aside from general review. I don't have much information on that, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. That was my only general inquiry about the situation. And Mark, do you want to present your non-recoverables now?
Yes,
And
and
will apply to all properties.
Yes.
Okay, good.
and I'll do it abbreviated. I don't know if you have it available, accessible.
We have it online.
Okay. So, and when I make reference to page numbers, I'll reference PDF page numbers to hopefully make it easier for you.
Okay, thank you.
Mine's just opening, so just bear with me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good to go.
So just as a general overview, the assessor accepts the concept of non-recoverables. And non-recoverables in concept recognize that even in true net lease situations, the landlord does not recover all the costs associated with the operation of the property. And therefore, an allowance has to be made for those costs in getting to net operating income. The assessor recognizes that. The issue is how much. That's really the issue, and what types of expenses. And without belaboring this, if we go back in history, and I know Mr. McIntyre's been around long enough, when we were in 2018, there was a 2% allowance and there was a 5% allowance. And certainly people like me would view that as a 7% non-recoverable. Then for 2020, the non-recoverable got reduced to 2%. And there was much to and fro at hearings about what the appropriate allowance should be. And many panels allowed a 7%, some didn't. And then for 2023, the allowance was increased to 3%, which is what's being presented to you in all these hearings as part of the calculation by the assessor. So appraisal methodology recognizes that what you're trying to do when you value property is determine what the future income stream will be. Therefore, you need to take non-recoverable expenses into account. If you go to PDF page 3 of my submission, there is a quote from the Appraisal of Real Estate, 3rd Canadian edition, and as well from the Sauder School of Business at UBC, which is a well-known school for appraisal methodology. And in that quote, the most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. Then at the bottom of the page, you see a lengthy listing of types of expenses, which can fall into the non-recoverable category. And I'll leave vacancy aside because that gets picked up in a shortfall. Leave that aside. Professional fees, audit fees, tenant improvements, leasing commissions, marketing and advertising, those are non-recoverables of the type that I'm concerned with. At page 4, I talk about the history. I've already told you that history a little bit. At page 5, the 2020 assessor change of approach that goes to 2%. I told you about that already. But I think without question, we know that all properties over their lifespan will incur certain expenses. Roofs will need to be replaced. Parking lots will need to be resurfaced at some point in their life. And those may be 20 to 25 years for items like that, but they are very expensive. Tenants turnover. This first property that we've done, it's a property that, never mind turnover, it hasn't been fully occupied yet, the 36% vacancy. And that's going to lead to commissions that have to be paid. And I've already identified in my brief $195,000 of commissions that have been paid already. And there's that additional space to be leased that will lead to more commissions. So what do assessors do about this? So if you go to page 6, here is the Saskatchewan Assessment Management Agency, SAMA, and their valuation guide. And they talk about establishing net operating income. They talk about non-recoverable operating expenses, which are expenses not passed on to the tenants. And if you go to the next page, page 7, there's then greater detail about the things that are non-recoverable, typically not included in a lease, like legal and audit fees, like structural repairs, such as the roof and wall repairs and parking lot resurfacing, like advertising and promotion, like leasing commissions. And they say in times of high vacancies and when the building is first being leased up, leasing commissions, even though amortized over the term of the lease for which they are incurred, can have a large effect on the net income generated by the landlord. And so for this property, again, we've got 36% of the space that will have to be leased. That will generate a big commission. One of the things that COVID is showing us, I will suggest, is that tenants are failing. Some of them hung on with government subsidies. but their financial resources, small businesses, are frequently diminished and sometimes exhausted. Tenants are closing, tenants are failing. That turns into a vacancy for a landlord, but it also turns into a need for a commission. My point simply through this is SAMA, an assessing authority, recognizes these types of expenses and recognizes leasing commissions. MPAC, bottom of the page, the Ontario Assessment Authority, same thing. They recognize these expenses. Go on to page 8, in the middle of the page, the impact market valuation reports for office and retail. There's 3 paragraphs of quote, and in the middle paragraph, second sentence, these expenses referred to as non-recoverable may include items such as marketing costs, large capital cost projects, legal and auditing, things like that. So my point to you simply is and that's as far as I'm going to go. The supporting material, the excerpts from the handbooks, everything that supports that is attached to the balance of the report. I'm not going to take you through that. I'm just going to highlight what I've done. My point simply is that 3% is not enough. Generally, 3% is especially not enough in the context of this property and its vacancy. And so I'm asking, in the context of this property, but other properties, for a higher allowance, and I'm asking for 7%. And so if you're going to use the assessor's revised gross potential income and the 12% vacancy, then I ask you to insert a 7% non-recoverable, adjust the NOI, and then use a 7% cap rate as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jamie, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
And Diane?
No questions, thanks.
Doug?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. I think we'll take a 10-minute break.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are live.
Thank you very much. We'll reconvene the hearing this morning. The next property on the docket is 1050 Leela Avenue. And Jamie, you can proceed with your presentation.
So the address here is 1050 Leela Avenue. So the roll number is 0500-903-7500. So this is a property that has a classification split. You can see here we have $7,189,000 for the taxable portion, which is a pet store and a drugstore, and then we have a 40S, if you will, which is governmental. I believe it's WRHA. And then on page 2, you can see we have an overhead shot of the property as well as a Google Street View image. It's at the Leela and McPhillips node there, just a little bit set back. And then at the rear of the property is the government offices there, and you can see that on page 3. And then on page 4, you can see these are the actual leases in place. So some of them are a little bit dated at this point. We have PetSmart 1525, Shoppers 2450, WRHA 1550 for the larger of their spaces that they're occupying, and then 1880 for the smaller space. And then you can see on page 5, we have my comparables. And then you can see on page 6, this is the 60T, this is the commercial spaces. And then on the following page, page 7, this is the WRHA spaces. And then that's summarized on the following page 8. So I do want to point out, though, that the large commercial space, the Shoppers Drug Mart, I'm just going to confirm here that I'm looking at the right one. Yeah, so the Shoppers Drug Mart, they actually pay $24.50. So that would significantly impact the assessment if we were to opt to use actuals. And I think we may run into a similar scenario as we did with the last property on when it comes to wanting to maintain certain parts of our original assessment that were, resulted in lower values, and try to revise those that would increase the value. So that effect, though, would sort of, you're using two different methodologies in a single assessment. So I would argue that if we wanted to, we could look at the actuals. And I've actually sent to the Board Revision mailbox, just while we're on break there, an alternate workup. Now, if you don't want to look at that workup, that's fine. I did want to make it available to follow along what I was saying a little bit more clearly. I'm not proposing that we change anything. I am defending this assessment. I simply would like to point out, though, that if we were to revise, one part of the assessment to say to be actuals, I think we should consider, following that methodology all the way through. And the effect that it would have if you were to use actuals, if you want to bear with me for a second, and I know Mr. Newman wouldn't be suggesting this, but if we were to use actuals with the rest of the parameters in place, our total assessed value would go from $13,108,000 to $14,301,000. So alternatively, sort of back into the number that is already on our assessment, because we're not seeking an increase here, you could use the actuals and then raise the cap rate to 7.42. Again, I'm not proposing doing this, but that would result in the same assessment virtually that we currently have. So the total is $13,106,000. If you were to use the actuals, the rest of the parameters, and just adjust the cap rate. So this is just to say that when you're being selective on what has already existed in the original assessment, it's like a clock. You can't take some gears out and expect it to work properly. Like it's a system. When you come up with an income valuation, if you start using components from one clock and put it in another, I think you kind of get something a little bit mixed up. there is an added wrinkle at this property because of the classification split. And I don't want to speak for Mr. Newman, but I believe part of the basis for his appeal is looking at how this has affected the 40S income stream. At any rate, I think it might become a little bit more clear as we go on here.
You know what? I think the board's gonna take a 5-minute recess for a discussion on this.
Sure.
Because effectively you're suggesting there's a higher value for this property.
I'm suggesting that I'm not suggesting that we seek an increase. I am not. I am suggesting that if we choose to mix our approaches and say we're going to keep the $18, $17 rate for the Shoppers Drug Mart and then ignore their actual rent, but we're going to use the actual rent or mix the features of the assessment. I think I want to explain that you're basically mixing two approaches to arrive at a new value while ignoring some of the basis for your change to begin with. Sorry, that's a little bit mealy-mouthed, but I'm not sure how else to explain it.
Well, we'll take a 5-minute recess and discuss it.
Thank you.
It will only be 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go offline and then I'll change it after.
And Mark, you have to go to the front because apparently these walls are paper thin. I didn't realize that.
But I also can't go outside because we're gonna get back.
I don't.
Okay, we are live.
Thank you very much. We'll resume this hearing this morning. Jamie, I have one question. Are there any more properties on this docket with an add-on?
As an additional, like a workup that you're looking for?
That's right.
I have recommendations. It's up to the panel. I haven't prepared a spreadsheet for them, but if I can give them as verbal recommendations, that's what I was planning on doing. I didn't plan to distribute any material today.
But you have the material.
I do not have them in a clean format, but I can try to prepare them. It wouldn't take very long, but I do have recommendations for.
How many are there?
So we have, basically, I have, I believe, 4 more recommendations that I could make to reduce the value.
Well, that's basically the rest of the docket.
Yeah, with the exception of this one and the next one.
How long do you think it'll take you to send it to Stephen?
10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, we'll give you 10.
Okay.
Can I just clarify something? When you asked the question, how many more add-ons? So it's one thing where he's making a recommendation, but I thought maybe your question was directed to, are we seeing situations where the basis of the assessment is changing?
Well, with the recommendations, which is the other 4, right? presume they're reductions, and then you can say yea or nay.
I understand that, but what happened with the last one, of course, is that the basis of the assessment changed.
Well, and I don't think that will happen with the rest of these. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Okay, we'll take another 10-minute recess, and Stephen, remind me when the 10 minutes are up.
Okay, so it's 10:45 now, so 10:55 when we return.
10:55.
Thank you.
Good time. 12 seconds left on my parking.
You thought you were going to be out of here that quickly?
No, I didn't, but I put it.
Okay, we're live.
Thank you very much. We'll reconvene the hearing this morning, and I apologize for the delay. We have received the additional documentation, and we will put the appropriate weight on them in our decision. So where are we?
Question. We are, and before I continue, I just want to apologize to everybody for not having this information prepared in advance. Can you hold on just 1 second? Somebody's coming into the room here.
It's going to happen this morning.
Sorry, it's a cleaner. At any rate, I apologize for not having my ducks in a row with this. I take full responsibility, and to Mark, I apologize for not having this to you with enough time to review it fully. And I do appreciate that, it puts you in a difficult position. So I do apologize for that.
Thank you. Apology accepted.
Okay, thank you.
Let's move on to wherever we are.
Yes, and I apologize for the length as well. But at any rate, we're at 1050 Leela Avenue, and I had sent the board a copy of, this is for illustration purposes, which is maybe a funny thing to say in one of these hearings, but it's to say that the overall value, I think, is fair. And I'm trying to show that by using the actuals. The difficulty here is that the breakdown between one stream and another, when you look at the numbers with some detail, would suggest that the retail portion should have a larger component to that total value, and the 40S partial exemption should have a smaller component of that total value. I'm not suggesting that we change the split. Again, it's just meant for illustration purposes. And to be clear, we don't have any particular requirement to, when an assessment goes out, the assessment a property owner gets is the final value. They don't get a specific valuation that gets that total value, or final value, I should say. It's especially at the board, these things are not set in stone, and so I'm just showing that if you were to use actuals and an increased cap rate to arrive at the same total value, it would be a larger portion on the retail and a smaller portion on the 40S. But again, I'm not suggesting that we change either of those streams or that division between the two. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
So let's look at your brief. Your page 2, the overhead photo in the upper half of the page. You made reference to the fact that this property was at the McPhillips node, but also mentioned that it's set back. So McPhillips is along the right-hand edge of the upper photo, correct?
Correct.
I may have missed that, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And so this property is some distance from McPhillips, and some of it, in fact, fronts upon Watson, which is a residential street with multifamily upon it, correct? Yes?
That's correct. I apologize if I'm cutting out.
Yeah, thank you. And so, and in both cases, this property has been, or for both income streams, a 6.8% capitalization rate has been used, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
And again, you've used the 3% non-recoverable. And can we look, please, to your brief to page 13. One of the tenants here is Winnipeg Regional Health, correct?
That's right.
And that's a government entity, correct?
Correct.
And you're familiar with the fact that frequently government leases do not allow for full recovery of expenses?
Not generally familiar with that, but I am seeing it here now in front of me.
So when you're looking at page 13, you're seeing that for WRHA, there was $16,461 of repair and maintenance relating to that tenant that the landlord had to absorb, correct?
Correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana, any questions?
I do not.
And
No questions for me, thank you.
I have no questions.
So the assessment as provided, of course, provides gross potential income for each of the income streams and provides a vacancy and a non-recoverable and ultimately a capitalization rate. And the combination of those two income streams ultimately becomes the value. Mr. Fougere has talked about the fact that he would have thought that perhaps there should be a greater portion of value associated with the retail as opposed to associated with the office. This premise used to be a Canadian Tire. And Canadian Tire moved, and they moved into what used to be Eaton's in the Garden City Shopping Center. If any of us can remember Eaton's in the Garden City Shopping Center.
It's a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And I actually grew up in that area, so I'm well familiar with it. But so when Eaton's went down, the Canadian Tire wanted to relocate to a location with greater visibility. Because as we've established, this site is set back. It has no frontage on McPhillips. It is set back from the corner of McPhillips and Leela. Part of it fronts onto a residential street with multifamily. And so in relative terms, it is, I would suggest, a poorer location. But as a consequence of the premises being reconfigured after Canadian Tire left, part became an office, which is WRHA, and part became two different premises. One is a Pet Value warehouse, and the other is the Shoppers Drug Mart. And the assessor's categorization of the property treats the Pet Value premises as a retail warehouse and assigns a rate to it, a model rate to it. And we're going to come to deal with other properties on this docket that fall into the retail warehouse category. And frequently those rental rates are lower because the level of finish, frankly, is lower in large retail warehouse facilities. In many ways, they're nothing more than a warehouse with shelving and cash registers at the front. And so we accepted the model rents as proposed for the fully taxable retail side of matters. With respect to the non-retail side, the office side, we looked at the actual rents in place with WRHA, and we determined that we would use those. The vacancy was accepted. The $9 shortfall was accepted. The 3% shortfall used by the assessor was not accepted. We know now through cross-examination that with WRHA in 2020, there was $16,000+ of repair and maintenance that had to be absorbed by the landlord because of the structure of the lease. I can tell you that for 2019, that amount was $21,948. Again, it's all about the structure of the lease. So that is why ultimately we have used a 7% allowance. There's a lot of roof space on this property. It's a large footprint. There's a lot of parking lot. All of that is going to cost money to address. The capitalization rate is 6.8%. We think that is too low. We look at this property and we see it's less than optimal location. Leela and McPhillips and the surrounding area, and we've got another couple of properties on this docket that are in that area. It is I'll use the word a jungle of retail in the sense that it is all over that intersection and Kingsbury and up and down McPhillips a bit. But it also got a little bit more difficult because we will all remember there was a large Sears store at the Garden City Shopping Center. And that Sears store closed in January of 2017. And what that led to is a redevelopment of the old Sears site into multi-tenant. And we'll hear that led to some slippage for some of the tenants, some of the properties rather, in terms of losing tenants to that site. And so in our mind, that's a factor to be looked at as well. The increased availability of space in the area, making it more difficult for landlords in the area. So you've heard my COVID presentation. I'm not going to take you through all of that again. I simply say to you, don't lose sight of everything that COVID has meant in terms of impacts upon retailers and the retail business. I then point you to the fact that, and I'm at PDF page 16 of my brief now. So I talked there about capitalization rate at 6.8%. For 2020, the capitalization rate was 7.3%. Again, I have difficulty accepting that we've had a decrease in capitalization rate of 50 basis points for a less than optimal site. And so I'll get to the calculation in a moment. If you look at my PDF, page 17, that's an overhead photo of the site taken from, that's Watson Street in the foreground. You can see the multifamily surrounding it. And again, it is some distance from McPhillips and Leela in terms of optimal visibility, as we've discussed. If you then jump ahead to page 23, you've got my calculation of value there. And you can see that on the retail side, PetSmart and Shoppers Drug, we accepted the value, the GPI of the assessor. And we ultimately used a 7.3% capitalization rate with a 7% non-recoverable. That turns into $6,411,000. For the Winnipeg Regional Health side of things, we use the rents in place. And again, the 7% and 7.3 cap, which turns into a value of $5,062,000. And as noted, that turns into a value overall of $11,473,000. I think that's really my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, any questions?
Yes, I do have a question. You had mentioned with the non-recoverables that the owner of the property would have to sort of absorb $16,000 or so in non-recoverable expenses relating to maintenance, maybe, and then I think you had said $20,000 the year before. Do you know what the net operating income was for 2020 or 2019 at this property?
It will be higher than yours because there's no vacancy.
So the vacancy that we've given is roughly, let's see. So we can kind of tease that out a little bit here. The vacancy that we've given, well, we can say it with the actuals. If you were to use the actuals, the vacancy would be about $55,000. But the NOI of this property, the net operating income of this property, were you aware that for 2020 that the net operating income was $1,024,100?
I'm not aware, but I accept, if you've done the calculation, I accept your calculation.
And then for 2019, are you aware that the net operating income is $1,019,828?
I'm not aware, but if you've done the calculation, I accept it. But again, the only observation I make is obviously there will be a difference because of the presence of vacancy.
So with the vacancy that I had seen, it was with the vacancy that we've used, it's roughly 55,000. Are you aware that the difference between your net operating income and the ones that are reported are approximately just about 200,000?
Again, I've not done the calculation.
Okay, well, those are my questions.
Thank you. Diane, any questions?
No, sir.
And Doug?
No questions from me either, thank you.
And I have no questions. So that concludes this property. Correct, Steve? Okay, the next property on the docket is 930 Jefferson. Look to it and let us find it. Okay, Jamie, you can proceed.
All right. I'm just pulling it up here. So the property is 930 Jefferson Avenue. The roll number is 0500-517-0000. The property has a class split again. So the 60T, that's the commercial portion of it. It's $12,346,000. And the exempt portion, 40E, is $2,519,000, totaling $14,865,000. And you can see on the second page of my brief the overhead picture of the property. And then you can see below is a Google Street View taken from Jefferson. And you can see there's like a suburban office on the left side of the photo. Then you can see sort of in the middle of that photo is a giant tiger at the back. And then it's difficult to see on this picture, so you can turn to the next page, page 3. There is another building back there with some retail you can see at the top. And then there's a building in front of that, if you look at the bottom of my page 3, and you can see, I think it's an immigration office. You can see it's closer to Jefferson there. And so that's another sort of suburban office. So I have my comparables on page 5, and then through to page 6. I have the first work up here. This is the commercial portion, the non-exempt portion. And then on page 7, we have the office areas, and I believe this is in relation to the office that was on the bottom of page 3, which is, I believe, an immigration office. And so just looking here, so I've looked again at the net operating income through the income and expense questionnaires going back to 2017. And I believe that our net operating income is well below some of the, for example, 2019, we have in our assessment 988,483 as our net operating income, and the property had 1,152,364. Now it was closer for 2020, but we have had repeat years where it's in the vicinity of the 1,152,000 for the net operating income. And then we look at as well what the history of the appeals of this property. For 2020, the board accepted an assessment or assessment department recommendation of 4,393,000. So we're actually only a 3.28% increase over the 2020. So we're basically a similar value.
Can you say that number again for 2020?
2020 we had 14,393,000 as the total. And so this was a property that I felt there really wasn't much room to move on this. I typically try to work with the applicant to try to come up with a solution that we can both live with. But unfortunately, I don't think there's much room when you look at the net operating income of the property for this particular valuation. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's try and help the panel. So again, your page 2, that's an overhead photo of the site. And again, McPhillips is at the right edge of the photo, correct?
Correct. So you can see in the photo, the overhead photo, there's a property just to the right, sort of down and to the right. It's a large box there. That's former Safeway. I think it's Freshco now. At any rate, one of the newer the grocery stores at the front, and then just beyond that, on the other side of that parking lot, is McPhillips. So it is further inset.
Right. And in fact, the retail buildings are at the extreme south edge of the site, so well set back from Jefferson, correct?
Correct.
And that building, still looking at the overhead photo on page 2, the building in the upper left corner of the property, you've described that as being an immigration office. I'm going to suggest to you, in fact, it's the Seven Oaks School Division. And the reason it's exempt, you may be aware, is because it was treated as a school. But maybe you're not aware of that.
I was not aware of it.
Okay.
I drove past it yesterday, but I may have looked at the wrong signage, and I apologize.
No need to apologize. That's fine. Okay, let's look at your page 6. Page 6 is your listing of spaces and the rents, and the 20,065 square foot space at a rent of $7.96. That's Giant Tiger, correct?
Correct.
And the 2 above that, 31,737 square feet, that's Value Village, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And that uses a rate of $9.76. Have you any idea why the model, and let me ask, does the model have built into it the concept of economies of scale?
It does.
So have you any idea why the model takes a space that's at 31,737 that is 50% larger than the space at 20,065 square feet and assigns a rent that is $2 higher per square foot, essentially 25%?
I believe, well, there's a number of things that can be changed, and I don't have all the details of what was done here specifically. And again, my focus, without getting too stuck in the weeds, is the net operating income of the property, how it's generating revenue year after year, and how that relates to our assessment and our overall number. And I have looked at this property using their actuals, and I think that in the end, I was satisfied that we have, gotten the overall number right.
Okay.
In terms of details on certain premises and what goes on behind the scenes, that's that I don't know if that's fruitful per se.
Well, I guess the board will decide how fruitful it is, but I hear you, and ultimately a cap rate of 6.65%. Any sense of why this property gets a 6.65 and the property at 1050 gets 6.8?
This cycle, we have used, the modeling has approached the cap rates in a slightly different way. Previously, they were done on more of a sort of table format that you can sort of look at what your property is and find it in a chart and go down the lines and through the list of what it is, and some different categories. This cycle, they've used regression analysis to generate the cap rates. So that means statistical information used in a model to generate the modeled cap rates. So they vary. There's more gradation, if you will, between instead of steps as they have been previously. So it's a variety of factors that give us the cap rates, but we follow IAAO standards and statistical measures to ensure that we're on target with that type of analysis. And this is what from the sales that are out there, statistically, the cap rates that have been provided through the model.
Okay, so I guess the answer is you have no explanation as to why 1050 Leela gets 6.8 and this gets 6.65.
I have no very specific explanation aside from the nature of the analysis is different this cycle.
Okay. So coming back to your brief then, if we look at page 6 is the calculation of value for the retail office side, or the taxable side, let me say it that way. And page 7 is the calculation for the exempt side.
Correct.
And the rent used is $16.21. And somebody's given it what I'm assuming is a rent quality of A1 high quality finish, correct?
Correct.
So that increases the rent, doesn't it, on a square foot basis?
It would.
As opposed to if what was picked, if we look back at page 6, the majority of the premises on page 6 are categorized as C2 standard finish, and they appear to bring with them lower rents.
Correct.
Okay. Again, was it someone's belief that this space, this 11,561 space, is office space?
I believe so.
Okay, that's fine. All right, and again, the standard 3% non-recoverable, correct?
Correct.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
I have no questions.
Doug?
I have no question. Thank you.
I have a question. What is the purpose of the additional document named rebuttal for this property?
There isn't.
Are you asking me?
Well, yeah, it was your additional document that you submitted. 1070 Main Street. Oh, sorry.
I don't think we have one for this property, do we?
No, I take that back. I thought we were on
Okay.
Main Street already. Oops. Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know that I made any rebuttal for Main Street either, but maybe we'll get to that after.
Well, just hang on here because we do have rebuttal for 2566 Main. Sorry, 1070 Main, sorry.
1070 Main.
you want to release.
Would you be able to forward that document to me? Or have Stephen forward that to me?
Yeah, it came on the Excel document you'd sent me in our recess, but we need to go into the recess.
Okay.
But that's the rec, I think.
Yeah, that was the rec. I just titled it about.
That
can be confusing.
that's okay.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Those. So I have different tabs set up there, and those are just different recommendations
Okay.
for the other properties.
So for 930 Jefferson, there is no recommendation.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, Mark, you can start your presentation.
Okay, so let's go to my submission. I described the property on page 2. The 11,561 square feet is occupied by the Seven Oaks School Division. It's exempt from property tax. That came about many years ago. The taxable portion, as you've heard a little bit already, there's an office building, but there's also the retail of the Value Village and the Giant Tiger, which are located at the rear of the property. I'll show you some more photos in a couple of moments. Let me try and identify the issues for you so you understand where we're going with this. We have a difference in gross potential income on both the taxable and exempt portions. And I'll detail that for you in a little bit finer detail. The vacancy is accepted. We have a difference in the non-recoverable, and we have a difference in the capitalization rate. So on to page 3 of my submission, the school division space. So when I first did this property many years ago, because these premises were built after the rest of the buildings on the property, they were purpose-built for the tenant, and they are built as multiple classrooms. There are 7 classrooms with 750 square feet minimum in each classroom, a separate teaching space of 1,500 square feet, a teaching kitchen, 3 offices, the computer infrastructure, which included 180 data wiring drops. And so this is not true office space. Ultimately, I set the rent at $14 based on a series of suburban rents. And I'll show those to you in a moment because I don't want to jump you around in the presentation. The balance of the building, the taxable portion, I'm on to page 4 now. Generally speaking, we've used the rents in place in the office for the existing tenancies. For the retail space, as we've discussed, Giant Tiger at 20,065 square feet, Value Village at 31,737 square feet. These tenants have each renewed their leases in 2015 and 2016 at $8 and $8.50 respectively. The assessor's model rent on the Giant Tiger space is $7.96 per square foot, essentially what the $8 they renewed at. The rent on the Giant Tigers, Value Village space of over 31,000 square feet is $9.76 per square foot under the model. Again, not sure why the model doesn't recognize economies of scale, but it doesn't. And we've used a rate of $8.50. We've also noted Giant Tiger at 850 Regent in 18,000 square feet at $9, and a Winners at 1320 Ellis at $9. And these, what I'll call somewhat budget type retail operations, they very deliberately select relatively poor locations because their business model requires them to pay less rent. And again, I'll show you an overhead photo with a little bit more detail. Non-recoverable, again, 7%. COVID, again, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but you've got the history of all the rent-related issues, the subsidy issues, difficulties with tenants, the economic climate, all of that. And so in 2020 assessment, the 20th percentile was 7.1% for a neighborhood shopping center, and the 80th was 7.3%. This property, or now it's dropped by about 85 basis points at the low end. This property is placed at 6.65. I think that's too low for this property for reasons I will articulate further. Again, you've got in the cap rate section, the survey, the trends of what market participants are saying in terms of the direction of cap rates. You've got the attributes of the building. Again, location, which I'll focus on in a moment. Our overall view is that there are differences between this property and some of the others we will deal with. It's a poorer location. The 2020 capitalization rate was 7.15%. I'm not sure why it's come down 50 basis points. Look at page 18. So page 18 is an overhead photo and outlined in red. Hopefully that red is visible. It's clear. So outlined in red is the property itself, the subject property. And then there's a diagonal line that goes from the southeast corner of the subject property towards the corner of Jefferson and McPhillips. And so that's intended to show you that this property is completely invisible from McPhillips because it is behind, as the assessor has noted, the former Safeway store, which is now one of their more discount type brands, but it still remains as a grocery store. And so the subject is completely invisible. Additionally, the retail premises, and you can see the roofs of those two premises. One is brown and the other is lighter in color. Those are at the very rear of the property. And so even when you're on Jefferson, unless you're directly in front of the property, you can't see them because of the surrounding buildings. I mentioned earlier that I had looked at a series of OSF rental rates. And admittedly, these are from the 2020 timeframe. You can see the average was 1406 on page 21, weighted average 1386, and median 1375. But a number of these leases were certainly done in the 2018 timeframe, so they are not that dated, relatively speaking. And as I told you earlier, ultimately we have selected $14 a square foot as the rent for the Seven Oaks School Division space, as opposed to the assessor's $16.21. So let me take you to the last page, which is the calculation. So the differences between we and the assessor. So I'll deal with the tax exempt Seven Oaks School Division first. You can see that my gross potential income is $161,854. The assessor is at $187,404, $14 or $16.21. That's the difference between the two positions. Vacancy is the same, shortfall is the same, non-recoverable I am at 7%, and I'm at a 7.15 cap compared to the assessor's 6.65. So that highlights the differences there. On the balance of the space, the taxable space, again, generally speaking, I have used the rents in place. And you can see that on Value Village, I've used $8.50, and on Giant Tiger, I've used $8. The assessor was $7.96 on Giant Tiger. So fundamentally, we are the same. Where we are not the same is on Value Village. The assessor is at $9.76, and I am at $8.50. And that difference accounts for about $40,000 of the difference between our respective gross potential incomes. So that's where a lot of the difference in value is to be found. Because the assessor's gross potential income on the taxable portion is $930,000. I am at round numbers, $869,000. So that's a difference of $60,000. And I'm telling you that 40,000 of it is in that single tenancy. 5% vacancy, 9% shortfall, 7% non-recoverable, NOI is 731,000, capping at 7.15. And that's really the differences between our respective positions. It's driven, I think, to a great extent by the differences in the gross potential income, as I've explained to you, and that is my submission.
Thank you very much. Jamie, any questions?
Yes, please. Would you agree that your combined net operating income between the two streams, the exempt portion as well as the taxable portion, is $868,857?
I'm just eyeballing the two numbers, but that seems about right.
Right. And are you aware that in 2019, the net operating income was $1,152,364?
I think you've covered that already.
Okay. I'm not sure if I did on this one, but I'll take your word for that.
It's in my notes.
Okay. Okay. Similar type of thing for 17 as well as 20. So I just wanted to point that out. And again, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Diane, any questions?
No, sir.
And Doug?
And no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So that concludes that part. The next property on the docket is 1070 Main Street. And let me just get there. And Jamie, you can proceed.
Sure. And maybe just before we start, I'll get you to open the document I sent. I titled it Remaining Recommendations.
Well, it's entitled Rebuttal PDF on ours.
Yeah, I split them into
Okay.
4 different.
Okay, sorry. So that
Same document,
Which one would that be?
2566 Rebuttal.
Okay, thank you.
Diane, have you got it?
Yeah, just a minute.
So I expect it would be the first page.
Yeah, I've got it. It's a one-page document.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Jamie.
Okay, so here my recommendation. Sorry, I should read the address and the roll.
Yeah, you have to finish the preamble. But
Yeah, so 1070 Main Street. The roll number is 1403-0157-100. And the original assessment was $1,653,000. I'm proposing that we reduce it to $1,487,000. And the basis of me doing that is two things. One is using the actual rents in place, and then using a 6.5 vacancy rate because there has been historic vacancy at the property. And so that brings it in line, much more closely in line to the 2020 board accepted recommendation that we had of $1,314,000. So here again with the using the actuals and then a vacancy adjustment to 6.5, I'm proposing the value be decreased to $1,487,000.
And Mark, how do you feel about the recommendation?
It's not what I wanted, but I'll accept it.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Well, that's fair. But
Okay, that concludes 1070 Main. The next one is 2575 Main Street, and let's just get there.
What's the number on that one?
20
2103?
70, the rebuttal is
2103?
Yes.
yes.
Thank you.
Of the main brief. Okay, Jamie, you can proceed.
okay, sorry, I'm just opening up what I have here. Yeah, so the address is 2575 Main Street, and the roll number is 050038251100. And the original assessment was 22,138,000, and hopefully we're looking at the same recommendation here. I have attempted to use the actuals here, but basically what I had discovered was that there was quite a bit of money or expense put aside for basically an amortized depreciation amount as an expense, and that is basically a structural reserve. And so I wanted to deal with that through a net adjusted rental rates, but I have not done so. And so I've just recognized that as an adjustment to the capitalization rate instead in this workup, arriving at what would be the same value, but I did not have that articulated here. So at any rate, basically what I've used here is meant to mimic the performance of the mall, and it represents a decrease from 22,138,000 down to 21,985,000.
And Mark, how do you feel about that?
I feel it's a small start, but it's not acceptable.
Okay, Jamie, you have to start with your presentation.
Sure. So, so you can see the property on page 2 of my brief. And so there's Sobeys here, as well as strip malls along the side, and there's a pad site in front with the A&W, which you can see starting on my next page, page 3 at the top, and then as well as another building with the Easy Financial and the Subway. And then you can see the subject's leases on page 4 of my brief, and going into page 5 as well. And I've included on page 6 of my brief, at the top is some also newer properties. And then the bottom portion here, I've got a few grocery stores. So 1575 Regent, 6650 Roblin, and 1500 Dakota Street are grocery store rents. And I'm going to suggest we just sort of overlook my page 7 and instead refer to our recommendation, because I would still seek the recommendation. And I've used the actuals there, and you can see on page 14, we have the mailer, and at the bottom we have a net operating income of $1,328,345. But there is a mortgage that was deducted from that. So you'd have to add that back in. And this is where my cap rate adjustment kind of comes in. So I had dealt with it through the cap rate adjustment, but it's the same as me not moving the cap rate and adjusting the rents to achieve a similar number, if you follow that. But that's the basis of my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
Yes. So let's look at your recommendation for a moment. The second tenancy, 1,654 square feet at $49.58 per square foot. Ever heard of a tenant who pays almost $50 a square foot per space? Anywhere?
A&W, there are a few of them in the city with high rental rates like that.
And is the reason for that the landlord gives them a pile of money to create the space?
It could be. I don't have the details of their lease. There are other fast food chains that approach $50 in terms of rent. I do want to point out, though, and it's unfortunate that I've expressed it through my recommendation this way, but I did try to originally basically use the net operating income or close to it from the income and expense questionnaire, so that would consider any depreciation deductions or things like that, to try to recognize what was happening at the property. But instead I've used a capitalization rate adjustment in lieu of that.
But when you say you try and use the NOI,
Mm-hmm.
if a property has limited vacancy at that point in time, you're no longer doing a market value, which takes into account vacancy, are you?
I add my vacancy in after the fact.
Well, that's what you tell us, but that presumes.
That is what I'm telling you, yes. But I do apologize that it's convoluted in my presentation, and I do not have that in a way that I can present clearly to you.
So look at page 15 of your brief, please.
Yep.
And the second tenancy down is A&W, correct?
Correct.
And you can see the landlord gave the tenant $240,000, correct?
Right.
Go down right to the bottom of that column. That tenant is Manitoba Liquor Commission. You can see the landlord gave them $609,000.
Right.
Right. So let's come back to your recommendation sheet. So you've used $49.58 a square foot for A&W. Then if you go down the page of that recommendation sheet, you've got a tenancy at $39.51 per square foot. 5,602 square feet. You see that?
Sorry, the 5,602.
Yes.
Yep.
$39.51 a square foot. Do you know who that tenant is?
Just looking here. I'm not sure what has happened there. Which tenant is that?
That's Public Works.
Okay,
Works Canada.
right.
Why do you think Public Works Canada is paying $39.51 for what is some office space?
Well, I do see through the mailer here that it is in fact a gross lease.
Right. Right. And your non-recoverable remains at 3%, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, and then similarly, you've got a tenant at $35 a square foot in 1,304 square feet. Do you know who that is?
Easy Financial there.
Easy Financial. So that's office space, correct?
Correct. Oh, yeah, office retail.
Right. And if you go back to page 15 of your brief, you see that the landlord gave them $55,000
Right.
and gave them 3 months free rent. Okay, now, if we look at page 7 of your brief for a moment, and I know you've said to us, let's ignore page 7 and let's just look at the recommendation. But I want to look at page 7 for a moment because I am confused as heck by something. So if we look at the third item down, 1,654 square feet, fast food, we've identified that that's A&W. The model says the rent should be $40.46, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But then if we go right down to the bottom, second one from the bottom, fast food, 1,500 square feet. The model says the rent should be $24.65. So the space that's bigger by 154 square feet has rent that is about $16 a square foot less. Any ideas why?
So
Under the model.
yeah, so I think this has to do with basically one has a drive-through and one doesn't. So I think the other one is the Subway. So it's I think that's the reasoning, that's the rationale for it. I believe the Subway is paying proportionally is less than what the A&W is paying. So I think they're about $30 versus the $49.58. And I know you've pointed out the tenant inducements. I unfortunately do not have a way to clearly show it here, and that is my deficiency here. But I did try to look at the performance of the mall, which I looked to the tenant inducements and considered them as well. But at any rate, I'll let you continue.
And when you considered the tenant inducements, did you reduce the rent on account of the inducements?
Just a moment here.
Because certainly in your recommendation sheet, you've told us you've used the actuals.
Just a moment. So just to clarify, I have not deducted the tenant inducements.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. And again, I don't want to belabor this, but when I look at page 7, and I identified what to me are spaces that have the same. So the column tenant class, that's the rent quality, isn't it?
You know, there. I think this is getting away from, you know, the site-specific nature of the performance of the mall, and into what feels like a probing set of questions about the model. There are a number of things that go into the model. I'm not relying on the model, especially in this case. The tenant class is a category of the physical space as it relates to the type of tenancy that is occupying it. We have other factors, age of the building. So there's multiple buildings on the site. They weren't all built at the same time. Age of the building, size, as you pointed out, quality. At times we have amenity features such as drive-throughs and things like that. I don't think it would be appropriate to say that tenant class relates to quality. We have the ability to adjust quality independently of the tenant class, but through the analysis of market information, we do differentiate between the way space is set up through the tenancy type. And so if you look at tenant class, it's more like the tenancy type. And that is bore out through statistical analysis of reported market rents.
All right. So I'll stop there. I mean, bottom line on all this is the recommendation you're presenting uses the face rates, some of which we've spoken about, but $49.58 for A&W, for example, and $39.51 for the gross lease for public works. No adjustment on account of inducements, as you've indicated. And that's what you're using to make your recommendation.
Correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane, any questions?
No questions. No.
No questions this time, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. Okay, Mark.
So, and I'll just for a moment speak about my questions about page 7 in the model calculation, even though I understand the assessors no longer wanting to rely upon it. I always find it interesting, as I say, that you know, seemingly the same tenant classes have very divergent rents per square foot, even though they're essentially the same size. But perhaps that's just a mystery that I'll be left with. So the 2020 assessment on this property was $18,603,000. We've now jumped up by round numbers, $3.5 million. Why have we jumped up by $3.5 million? Well, if I look at the recommendation, the answer is because the gross potential income is much higher than what is actually being generated by the rents. Now, Mr. Fougere will say, oh, no, that's not true because the recommendation uses the actual rents. To which I say, yes, but $49.58 a square foot is not rent for a 1,654 square foot A&W. It's rent for a package of inducements that was given to the tenant. So I'm going to speak about some of these things, and I'm going to walk you through my presentation. Page 2 of the PDF, I note the distinction between the 2020 value, $18,603,000, and the proposed $22,138,000, now adjusted to $21,984,000. The assessor's gross potential income was $1,649,000 and change. Now it's $1,767,000. So the assessor, through this recommendation, has increased the gross potential income by about $118,000. The model, of course, is driven by the concept of market rents for space. So the history of this property is that it was built in sections. And we will come eventually, and it might be easier actually, if we go there now to page 18 of the PDF. Okay. That's a site plan.
That's correct. Everybody there?
Yeah. So in the upper right-hand corner, the big dark blob, I'll call it, rectangular sort of, that's the Sobeys. As you work to the left, you've got a building that's called Building A of 8,800 approximately square feet. Then you've got what's called Building B along the left-hand margin, which is a variety of other tenants. And in the corner, you've got Service Canada. That's office space. That wasn't there when the rest of it was built. It came to be built because Public Works Canada issued an RFP. Now, when you have corner units in L-shaped strip malls, they tend to be much, much bigger. And they tend to have limited frontage because they're squashed into the corner sort of. This is one of those. They weren't going to build space. In the real estate business, that space is sometimes called the heel because it is notoriously difficult to lease. Again, because it's larger, it has less visibility. So that space got built when an RFP was issued in 2013. You've got a freestanding Manitoba Liquor Commission building. You've got the A&W, and then you've got a multi-tenant building of the Subway, the Taco Del Mar, and that additional space, which is Easy Financial. Taco Del Mar, by the by, terminated their lease at April 1 of 2021. They couldn't make a go of it anymore. I'll say more about that. So page 4 of my submission, Service Canada. As I've said to you, undeveloped, built 2013. It's a gross lease. So second paragraph, property taxes, you can only get recoveries in excess of base year taxes. 2014 taxes are the base year. So $5.08 of taxes is absorbed within that face rate of the lease and is not recovered from the tenant. Similarly, there's a base year for operating cost increases. And thereafter, you can only get increases in accordance with the consumer price index. The base amount is $5.70 for those base year expenses. And so that's absorbed by the landlord. Additionally, the landlord has to provide the janitorial service. That costs $4.64. So that's absorbed by the landlord. And then the landlord had to do all the improvements in the space. The landlord had to give them turnkey space. And the landlord spent $487,000 to do that. And on 5,602 square feet, that's $87.07 a square foot. And if you then amortize that over the 10-year term of the lease, it's $8.70 a square foot, ignoring interest. So although the lease on its face says $39.21, in fact, for all these reasons, the actual rent, if you subtract all these items, would be $15.72 a square foot. I've used $16 for this space. That's consistent, I'll suggest to you, with suburban rents of this type in this type of properties. Okay, the Liquor Commission, page 5. So the Liquor Commission space on its face is $29 a square foot, but that's too high. I give you 3 comparables, and I'll show you the photos in a few moments. But I give you 3 comparables for Liquor Commission space: 917 Portage, $24 a square foot; 710 St. Anne's, $22 a square foot; 1600 Ness, $24.75 a square foot; I think all three of those comparables are superior in location to the subject. I've used $24 a square foot for the liquor commission space. A&W. So you've heard a little bit about that already. So they gave them $240,000, which on a 20-year lease is $22,000 a year, which is $13.44 a square foot. My brief says the city was using $27.24 a square foot. That was an error. They were using $40.46 a square foot in the model. The A&W located at 2230 McPhillips, a property we're coming to on this docket, $25 a square foot. I've used $25 a square foot because the A&W lease is inducement loaded. There's also a McDonald's at Leela, where the rent is $22.47 a square foot. Then Subway and Taco Del Mar, 1,500 square foot Subway, 1,200 square foot Taco Del Mar, in the same building together with a non-restaurant related use, operated by the same company. These two brands frequently share space. On the face of it, the landlord has a 10-year lease with these tenants, but in reality, the landlord doesn't, because these tenants always negotiate for themselves an option to terminate the lease. And they did it in the case of Taco Del Mar in April of 2021. I give you some comparables, and I'll show you photos in a moment. 1520 Regent at $24 a square foot, Ellis and St. James at $24.50. I use $25. Easy Financial, $35. Again, excessive for that tenant. I reduced that rate to $22. For the balance of the tenants, I use the actual rents in place. Non-recoverable, you've heard me on that, so I'm not going to belabor that. Capitalization rate, you've heard me on that. Again, I simply make the observation to you that the capitalization rate for 2020 was 7.15. And I appreciate that Mr. Fougere in the recommendation is now using 7.25, but he's using it for a different reason. He's using it to deal with other issues unrelated to simply the risk of the investment. So again, you've heard me at some length on these items. So let me now take you through my attachments. Page 17 of the PDF is intended to give you a bit of mapping so you'll understand where this property is out on North Main. It is north of Kildonan Park. It is north of Chief Peguis Trail. Page 18 we've looked at already. That's the site plan of the various buildings. Page 19 was the original assessment. Page 20 shows the different buildings on the site. And then I have some photos. So page 21 is a photo of the subject site, and you can see the Liquor Commission in the foreground. Then page 22 is 917 Portage, the Shoppers Drug Mart I was telling you about. Page 23 is the 710 St. Anne's property, a Liquor Commission I was telling you about. I think I said a Shoppers Drug Mart I was telling you about in relation to 917 Portage. It was the Liquor Commission I was telling you about there. Similarly, 1710 St. Anne's Liquor Commission. Similarly, 1600 Ness, Madison Square. That's 1661 Portage, the tall building on the left-hand side of the photo. Page 25 is 2230 McPhillips. That is the A&W at that location at a rate of $25 per square foot with a drive-through, by the by. Page 26 is the Subway at Ellis and St. James. Page 27 is the Subway and at 1520 Regent. Then we have ultimately the questionnaire information. And so we finally come to my calculation of value. So again, the main differences are that I've used generally the actual rents in place, but for all those tenants I walked you through, Easy Financial at $22 as opposed to $35, liquor commission at $24 as opposed to the base rate of $29, Public Works, the gross lease adjusted to net at $16, the A&W to $25 from $49.50, and Taco Del Mar and Subway from $30 down to $25. So my gross potential income is $1,529,000. The assessor in his original workup was $1,649,000 and has now become $1,767,000. So the assessor is $240,000, $238,000 higher on the potential income than I am. And the simple reason is because of rates of $49 and $39 and things like that. Our vacancy is the same at 5%. Our shortfall is the same. I've got a 7% non-recoverable for the reasons I've discussed with you. And I've got the capitalization rate at 7.15% because I don't believe there's a basis for the cap rate to come down to 7.15. And that drives a value of $18,411,000. And subject to questions, that is my submission.
Thank you. Jamie, any questions?
So in 2020, the board accepted an assessment department recommendation to reduce the value to $19,395,000. Do you believe that this property, effectively the value has come down or should come down from that?
The value was resolved for 2020 at $18,603,000.
Let me just see here because I have something different in my notes.
The board decision was appealed and it was resolved at $18,603,000.
Okay, thank you. I understand. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Diane, any questions?
No, sir.
No questions, thank you.
I have a question. So you're showing on your workup here, the leasable area of 77,785 square feet on your last page.
Yeah.
And the assessor is showing 79,723, discrepancy of over 2,000 square feet. Anybody have any idea as to why?
I'll give you two comments. So in the recommendation, he's actually at 77,785, but that I think is because it's tracked the rental, I suspect. My best guess would be when I go back and look at the original brief, there is an area called storage mezzanine of 2,806 square feet that is showing. It's probably got something to do with that.
And is that included in that tenant's rent? Or it's separate
No, it's included in the rent.
in the rent? Okay.
Yes, and I would agree with Mark as well.
And that's why there's a difference.
Right.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you very much. That concludes 2575 Main Street. The next one is 2188 McPhillips, and no briefs have been submitted, so perhaps you guys can enlighten us as to why.
A very diligent assessor in Mr. Fuger's office, Marina Tinawara, brought to both of our attentions the fact that a supplementary was being issued.
So is this withdrawn?
It's so we agreed we wouldn't submit briefs on it because of that.
So you want this appeal to remain active? Let me get this correct. And there is no brief on for which we can render a decision.
Right.
Correct.
From your perspective, that's correct. Yes.
You look, it shouldn't be before the board, should it?
Probably not.
I would propose one of two things, either with all due respect, withdrawal or a confirmation. Because in either case, as Mark pointed out, the assessment will be superseded regardless of what the panel chooses to do with the value.
We don't know the value.
Right.
We don't know the particulars of the property.
But we both have agreed that it will be superseded by the supplementary assessment. So it's a moot point in terms of administratively how you want to deal with it.
Well, typically, and I'll just give you some history as to when this has happened before. The appellant withdraws the appeal because there is going to be another appeal of the new value, whatever that may be. But we can't render a confirmation without anything in front of us. You want to have a brief recess, and I will consult with.
Jamie,
Yes.
can you check if the supplementary has issued?
Yes, I can do that. How long of a recess did you want to take?
We'll take 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are back.
We will reconvene the hearing this afternoon. It's no longer morning. The panel has discussed the issue with 2188 McPhillips Avenue, and we will adjourn this property for a hearing at a later date. Thank you very much. That brings us to the next property, 2230 McPhillips. Just let us bring it up. Okay, Jamie, you can start your presentation.
Okay. So we have 2230 McPhillips. The roll number is 0500904000. And the original assessed value was $7,318,000. I do have a recommendation that I had sent along there. So if you wanted to open that up, I'm proposing using the actuals here, as well as an 8% vacancy allowance. And the property has faced some vacancy issues over the last couple of years.
2230. Just hang on for a second, Jamie.
Yeah.
Rebuttal?
Rebuttal's 2106. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, continue. So using actuals and vacancy of
8%. And so those are the only changes that I've made in my proposed recommendation here.
and to reduce it to 7,202,000.
That's right.
And Mark, how do you feel about the recommendation?
I don't think so. And just so I can be clear, you're saying you used all the actual rents in the recommendation?
That is my intention, yes.
Okay. I'll have to check, but I'm just looking at my own calculation, which I thought was based on actuals. I'm seeing some differences, so I think we need to get going here.
Okay, Amy, let's proceed.
Sure. So if you want to go back to my brief, you can see the property on page 2. We have the overhead, the aerial photography. And, you know, if you remember the 1050 Leela, that was the property to the rear of this one. So this is the one that actually is alongside Leela, and then the A&W and the end cap faces or runs alongside McPhillips. And so you can see more of the, you can see the street view of the strip here. This is just sort of moving along towards McPhillips through the parking lot. And on page 4, you can see the property, subject property leases. And then on page 5, I have some comparable rents here. And then I would just refer to the workup that I had sent through with the resulting value of $7,202,000. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mark, any questions? No.
Getting really quick.
Oh,
No questions.
no questions. Diane?
No questions.
Doug?
No questions for you, thank you.
And I have no questions. Okay, Mark, you can proceed with your presentation.
Can I have just 1 second? I just want to, as I was
Sure.
saying, I just want to check the rents. So, as the assessor has noted, corner of McPhillips and Lima. This is the property that is directly across the street from the Garden City Shopping Center. I'll show you some photos. And this is a property with the redevelopment of the Garden City Shopping Center, lost tenants to the Garden City Shopping Center. Bulk Barn, which used to be in this site, moved across the street. You get better visibility in the Garden City Shopping Center. It's a better parking lot. It's simpler to get in and out. There's multiple ways to get in and out compared to the subject. So all of that is told to you on page 2 of my submission. And this is not uncommon where these large regional shopping centers are being redeveloped. We're seeing it across Canada. We're seeing it at Polo Park. We're seeing it, as I said to you at an earlier point, the Target store, the stadium site was intended to be retail, but they're now getting it rezoned for multifamily because the demand for retail is diminishing for a variety of reasons. So if you look at page 3 of my submission, I speak there about the vacancy. 2019 showed 4,200 square feet, which would calculate to 17.5%. That was caused by the departure of Bulk Barn going across the street. It got filled to some extent. There was 2,800 still vacant in 2020, which would calculate to about 11.66%. And so I was proposing to move the vacancy to 7% to recognize that. The non-recoverable expenses, in addition to everything else I've told you, the rent roll shows leasing commissions of approximately $75,000. And again, you've got all the other things that were referenced in my initial submission to you about legal and audit and the roof and the parking lot and all those other things. And that's why I again say to you that 3% is not enough. The capitalization rate section, again, let's not lose sight. And we've been through it of COVID and all the impacts of COVID and what it's meant to the retail climate. And all of those things So for 2020, this property had a capitalization rate of 7.3%. It's now been dropped down to 6.85. That should drop of 45 basis points. In my respectful view, considering what's going on in the retail world, considering the increased competition directly across the street in the form of the former Sears site and its redevelopment, and I'll show you some photos of that in a moment. I was proposing to bring the capitalization rate up to 7.5%. Now, let's just look at page 15 of my submission. That's the notice from Garden City Shopping Center that Sears was closed as of October 2 of 2017. Page 16 is an overhead photo. And on the right side, you can see A&W, that's 2230 McPhillips. The left side, across McPhillips, in other words, that's the Garden City Shopping Center. And that roof, the immediate roof that you see closest to McPhillips, that entire roof area is what was Sears. It was a very large store, obviously. And if you then look to page 17, you can see a plan of the redevelopment of what used to be Sears. You can see that Seafood City has gone in there. You can see Bulk Barn, which came from across the street, as I've just described to you, Michael's, and a number of other smaller CRU spaces for tenants. And then you see at page 18, a present day photo of the redevelopment of what used to be the Sears. You can see the Bulk Barn sign in red and the Seafood City. And then page 19 is the same photo, but it's just taken from further out so that you can actually see the Michaels there as well. And again, at some point I said to you earlier that this area around Leland McPhillips and along McPhillips to Kingsbury has become a bit of a jungle in terms of what's going on in terms of development. Then you've got on page 28, you've got the questionnaire. And again, you see a number of tenants who are not able to pay their rent and were given free base rent onto page 29. And then what we see on page 30 is my calculation. And what I was hesitating to do, because I believed I used the actual rents in place and was getting to $550,000 of gross potential income. Mr. Fougere is saying he's used the actual rents in place and is getting to $572,000 of income. So there is a bit of a discrepancy there. And I'm not sure what it is, frankly, at the moment. But
I think I know what it is. If you want to continue on, I can maybe just touch base with that afterwards.
Why don't you just tell?
Why don't you do it now?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think if you look at the mailer on page 27, 26 of Mark's brief, there are two things, actually, 25 of Mark's brief. One of them is, it says Unit 1B, Cocoa Fresh Tea and Juice. The mailer says, indicates a base rent of $30 a square foot. And I think that's calculated on 1,338, even though the rentable area, if you look on the next page, is 1236. So there's that one, and then there's a vacant unit that had expected rent, and I had included the expected rent. I'd be willing to go with Mr. Newman's figure here. I believe he had $23.10. I'd be willing to use that figure on the 2,800 square feet for the small change that makes. Without wanting to get too far out of order here, that would change my recommendation to $7,060,000. And I apologize for, the discrepancy here. But Mark, please continue.
Okay, so it's good to have a spreadsheet in front of you.
Right.
It's a tool the board should be given, frankly.
Couldn't hurt.
Different conversation. No, I won't say anything further. Okay, so I appreciate that adjustment. And what does that do to the gross potential income, just so I'm clear, Jamie?
So for the gross potential income, I then get $561,169.
Thank you.
What's the new NOI?
The new NOI would be $483,578.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what we're really left with, I think in many ways at the end of the day, is the capitalization rate and the non-recoverable. I think in many ways that's become the issue. And so I'm suggesting the higher non-recoverable. I'm suggesting the higher capitalization rate. And obviously you've got discretion to pick a rate. I suggested 7.5. So it'll be up to you as to what rate you select. But that's really the difference between our two positions. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, any questions?
No questions. Thank you very much.
Diane?
No questions. Thank you.
And
No questions for me, thank you.
I have no questions. So the last property on the docket is up next, 2401 McPhillips, and just let us get there. Okay, Jamie, you can start with your presentation.
All right. So the property is 2401 McPhillips Street. The roll number is 1105-1797-7970. And you can see, actually, this is another one where I do have a recommendation as well. So I'll just quickly walk you through that. Here
That's in the rebuttal brief, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So here I'm proposing just taking the assessment that we have on file here, and then creating a unfinished allowance for I believe it's unit 5. So I had inspected, so I inspected it yesterday and saw that unit 5 was in fact shell space, and so that's 2,178 square feet. And I've used an allowance again of $150 a square foot, and that results in an adjustment, a negative adjustment of $326,700, and we'll round it here, but that then is deducted from the assessment, and so the new proposed assessment is $5,195,000.
And Mark, how do you feel about that? Or you needed time to check it?
No, I understand what he's done. I still have a concern about the cap rate. So I would want to speak to that alone, perhaps. We were not, our NOI, our GPIs were the same on this one.
Okay.
So that's not where the dispute was. And the vacancy was the same. So the dispute became the non-recoverable and the cap rate. And you know, this certainly narrows the gap for different reasons. But I want to speak to the cap rate still.
Okay, Jamie, you can proceed. And if you want to focus on those two items.
Sure. So just to quickly give a bit of a overview of the property, we are on page 2 on my brief here. You can see the aerial photography of the property. And then you can see the units alongside underneath the aerial photography. Something I did want to point out here. This was, I believe at one point it was a roller rink. It has gone through pretty extensive renovations over the last few years. As you know, for the building itself, it's basically been gutted. I don't know quite what remained of it, but I believe basically the structure underneath was maintained, and then everything else was sort of replaced around it. And the parking lot has received a new paving as well, I believe. And then another thing I wanted to point out was on sort of the north part of the parcel, there's actually a small pad site here. Unfortunately, I did not include that in the, it was an oversight on my behalf. I did not include that in the Google Street View here. But there is a small restaurant in that space. You can see it in the aerial photography. And excuse me. Furthermore, there are permits in our system for an expansion. So on the south side of the property, you can see there's sort of a dusty, gravelly area just below the strip mall there. There are 2 units of totaling approximately 3,100 square feet that are, it's a permit that was taken out in May, so I would expect likely some point this year. But regardless, until that gets built, we'll proceed with this appeal here. Just wanted to give an idea there. So then you can see on page 3, you can see the 2017 purchase of the property for $2,800,000. As I mentioned, I believe some of the bones of the strip mall was still there, and then that, utilized, and then that there was still that restaurant on the kind of north corner of the property. So with the permit value and the sale price, that totaled approximately, just to give you an idea, $4,450,000. But that did not include any of the fit-up costs for the units. So that there's an additional construction beyond the sale price, of course, of $1,650,000. And so that totals out to $4,450,000, but it again does not include the fit up of the units. So just like I was making an adjustment for the unfinished unit, you would expect that there would be a positive adjustment for finished units off of that value that I've just mentioned. But regardless, we'll continue on here. You can see the subject leases on that page 3. ranging from 32 down to 22 for the inset units. The $32 is for the pad site restaurant that's at the front. And then I have my comparables on page 4. But since we're not in disagreement about the potential rent, I'll just leave that as it is. And with the overall capitalization rate, I do feel it's fair with 6.55%. This is, for all intents and purposes, a new mall. I believe that within the range of outside sources that we have here, between 6.75 for Colliers, 6.25 and 6.75 for CBRE. I think this is sort of suggesting that this is a sort of a somewhat middle of the road strip mall here. So I would recommend that we just reduce the value to the 5 million. Let's bring it back up here. Apologize. 5,195,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
No.
No? Diane?
No, sir.
Good.
No questions approved. Thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you very much. Mark, you can proceed with your presentation.
So let me take you into my presentation to page 17.
The picture?
The picture, yes. The roller rink picture.
Yes, I
And-
remember what it looked like.
But that's the point of this photo, is that's the roller rink picture. And the assessor was mentioning a pad site. And to the left of the picture, you can see what is presently a restaurant. And then page 18, you can see the present day version and the restaurant as well. Locationally, this is to the north of the corner, the intersection of Leland and McPhillips. It's a couple blocks to the north. And I'll suggest that to the extent there's a main, what I'll call commercial corridor in that area, it is that area between McPhillips and Leela and McPhillips and Kingsbury. Once you start to go further north, I'll suggest it diminishes in quality a little bit. You've got a roof report, which is part of my submission, which is beginning at page 28. And it notes the fact that the roof is in grade C condition, and that's on the smaller building. Ultimately, it will have to be replaced, obviously, at some significant expense. But I think the most important point from my perspective is the capitalization rate. And again, I just look at the range of rates we've seen today, and 2230 McPhillips comes in at 6.85. I think that's too low, but it comes in at 6.85, right at the intersection, right at the corner. 1050 Leela comes in at 6.8. This one comes in at 6.55, and I just think that's too low, having regard to everything that's going on in the retail world. I think an increase to that is appropriate. And so my suggestion would be that what should be done is you should determine the value and then make the adjustment, which Mr. Fougere has made, of $326,700 for the unfinished space. And that's my submission.
Thank you. And Jamie, any questions?
No questions.
And Diane?
No questions.
And
None for me. Well, thank you.
I don't have any questions either. We have heard all of the items scheduled for today's hearing, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you for everybody's patience. Take care, you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys too.
Bye.